This episode of LA Meekly is brought to you by Alto. Alto is a rideshare company focused on consistency, luxury, and safety. You feel like a VIP, which means very important passenger, every time you ride with Alto. Unlike the others, all Alto vehicles are the same. The company manages its own fleet of luxury SUVs, which are Alto branded and outfitted with great amenities like bottled water, Wi-Fi, and charging cables, so you get the same exact ride experience every time, and you know what to expect and don't have to worry about getting into the wrong car.
That is a consistent worry of mine, is that I'm going to get into a car and they're going to, at the moment, realize they want to kidnap me. They're like, oh yeah, we'll just take him.
I'm in this deep.
Talking about the amenities, in my head, I see Kevin McAllister in the back of a limo eating a pizza. That's how
it's exactly like that. So it truly feels like a personal car service on demand. They've taken COVID safety to a new level. Every car has a HEPA filter, plexiglass barriers, and is rigorously disinfected between passengers. All drivers and passengers are required to wear masks at all times.
Perfect.
And because Alto employs their drivers, they can actually enforce this. Their professional team of drivers are all trained, background-checked employees, not contractors. You can relax knowing that you're riding with a trusted driver, and that driver receives critical employee benefits that protects them and you. Download the Alto app. You can request your ride on demand or pre-schedule a ride. If you download the Alto app today and use code LAMeekly, all one word, you will receive $30 towards your first Alto ride anytime this month. So that's Alto.
Get to where you're going in style. Hi, and welcome to a home edition of LA Meekly.
The podcast. Home. We're holding our mugs full of, mine's water. Water at the beginning of the day.
Coffee's a little too blue for me. That's a man's drink. I'll drink hot water, thank you very much. Tea? No, thank you.
I'll drink hot water that's been sitting next to a lemon. We're recording this on Zoom because it's cold outside, and This is just a quick little thing we're doing to introduce, what would you call it? It's not quite a field trip. It's a virtual visit.
Yeah, it's a virtual visit.
A virtual visit.
A digital high five.
A digital... I'm trying to think of something that starts with a D. A digital dungeon?
Yeah, that's it. It's not digital discussion. Why would it be that? No, it's dungeon.
Welcome to our digital dungeon with a very special guest today. We have Max Miller from Tasting History on YouTube, which, if you're not familiar, do you want to give a rundown of, because you were saying we went into the episode with a base understanding that everybody knew what his show was about, and most people I'm sure do, but for those who don't, give a little description of what Max Miller does on Tasting History with Max Miller.
Max Miller will take a recipe, like a very old recipe that he had to dig up, usually, like he wants to talk about...
Sometimes literally. He's a grave robber. Welcome to the digital dungeon.
My girlfriend got introduced to it through the episode about Pompeii bread. So not only does he show you how to make bread how they did in Pompeii, he'll give you a history lesson, and he's very funny, very likable guy.
We were both saying about how a really deep dive into the history of these things, and it's great. Like he did just like tomb bread from ancient Egypt. So it's I don't even know how he like I said, he's a gravedigger. I don't know how he gets these recipes for ancient Egyptian tomb bread, but they're very thoroughly researched, and he cooks everything. And he was saying in the episode that the history parts are the most watched parts, even compared to the actual cooking parts. And it's so interesting because it's a cooking show, which is one really fun thing to watch. And then
he makes it more fun than usual, I think.
Yes, he does. And no, every single cooking show is just a thrill ride to watch. But even if you're not into cooking, there's then a really interesting history lesson. And they're all bite-sized sort of things.
Yeah, usually like 15 to 20 minutes. And he has really great recipes for stuff. Some things I would never try. Some things seem very impractical, but then he'll like kind of guide you to like, here's how they would do it, and here's how I would do it to make it taste a little bit better.
Yes, because that was one thing I brought up of how disgusting food from the past. You have to change some of those recipes. Like the Pompeii bread, I'm sure had like, and then we use rocks from the ocean in the bread because it's good for your kidneys. And I'm sure he changed that to salt or something.
Yeah, he has an episode about hardtack and grog, which is like pirate food. And, so I'm watching him because I was very curious what grog was, which I think it's just like rum and water.
Isn't that the Baby Yoda?
Don't start. It's just like a little thing, like a little aside. He's like, oh yeah, well, like we all know that pirates used to work for the British Navy. What? Is that where pirates come from? Like 10 or so episodes that I've seen, I always learn like a little, like a sentence that it's like, oh, that's gonna stick with me because I've been curious about that and I didn't know how to phrase it.
Yeah, it's a fun show, and I'm glad that we were able to get in contact with him to talk to him, because he's a nice guy and he was fun to talk to. And for all of his listeners who might be coming to listen to us for the first time, we are LA Meekly. We are a LA history podcast. We don't do any cooking. We refuse.
Yeah, I don't know how. I keep burning my hand and I stop.
We've done a few food episodes.
Our food episodes have covered like fast food around that originated in LA, like In-N-Out or
Panda Express, which has some controversy right now, but we didn't know that at the time. And then foods that were invented in LA. Yeah, the way our shows work, we do an intro, a little.
Yeah, make it sound normal. Like it's
we
not
we
weird.
do this completely normal radio sketch at the beginning of an introduction for a few minutes that has nothing to do with anything, and then we start the episode. We talk about something we did in the last month. We answer a listener question, and then we go into the history. So if you want to give us a try, here we are. I mean, you found us somehow, but you can listen to us on iTunes, YouTube, Stitcher, and all that. Yeah. So what else do we have to say?
We have to say, enjoy the episode. It's a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun to talk to him, and hope that you like it.
And I'll enjoy this digital dungeon discussion. See? I did what you wanted. But it is in a dungeon.
It's a normal discussion. We don't use the dungeon, but it is in a dungeon.
But it is in the dungeon. We just don't utilize all of the features of the dungeon.
We're painting upstairs right now, so all our discussions are in the dungeon right now.
A digital den.
Why didn't you say den?
Because
why didn't you say den?
I feel more comfortable in a dungeon. That's been this little introduction. Enjoy our time with Max Miller of Tasting History. Bye.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi. Hi. How are you? Here, let me put on my. You can see my. Sorry, I'm unshowered. It's a mess.
I took a shower. I just got out of the shower for this. How dare you?
I love that poster behind you, Daniel.
Yeah.
Is it Jaws, but not Jaws.
It's from the John Williams Hollywood Bowl concert. They had one that was like a Death Star Hollywood Bowl. But
they're all threatening.
Yeah.
That's his music.
He only does aggressive movies.
He does. I think Harry Potter is about as tame as he gets. You know?
The poster is him as Voldemort, though?
Right. Yeah, no, I mean, it's still aspects.
So first I want to ask, are you from LA?
No, I'm from Phoenix originally.
Okay.
Oh, wow.
When did you come to LA?
I came to LA in 2012, I think. Okay. But I was in New York for like 8 years before that.
Why'd you come? Why? Why'd you come here?
What?
Oh, this is an interrogation, by the way.
What are you doing here?
I came here to pursue voice acting.
Oh, cool.
So I did
Was that what you were doing in New York also?
No, I was doing musical theater in New York on stage, but I kind of fell into voice acting while working for Disney Cruise Line, and I loved it so much that I moved across the country. Also, I was sick of living in New York.
Impossible.
I mean, I love New York, but it's a hard place to live, especially when you don't have money. LA is an easier place to live when you don't have money.
Yeah.
No place is easy to live, but it's easier.
Did you take a Disney cruise all the way here to get here?
Wouldn't that have been nice?
I worked through the Panama Canal?
You can do that. They do that.
Really?
I mean, nobody can cruise right now, but so I lived on a cruise ship for almost a year.
Oh, wow.
And it was heavenly.
What were you doing?
I was singing, performing in one of the shows, and then also doing the voice of Iago the parrot.
Really?
Yeah.
That's fantastic.
It was kind of a weird situation, but it was amazing.
I want to ask you to do Iago, but I don't know if I should.
It's been a very long time since I've done it, so it's not as spot on, but
you know, you kind of gotta make the face. And you do your best, Gilbert Godfrey.
but I used to listen to him for like an hour before I would do it, and it would get right there in the...
I see why you got out of that field.
I loved doing it.
Yeah, that sounds great. So you actually lived on the boat the whole time?
I lived on the boat.
You wouldn't get off it.
I mean,
only come
they
to
let us off. In fact, I mean, I barely...
You weren't a prisoner?
I was not a prisoner. It's some cruise ships, you know. I mean, so a lot of people who work on cruise ships, I don't want to say they're prisoners, but I mean, they work 90 hours a week. Oof. They don't get days off for 4 months at a time, but I worked like 10 hours a week, and I spent most of my time on the beach, so it was pretty glorious. I'm not gonna lie.
Yeah. You really did get into the eating grubs and So what do? You work at Disney now still? Or you were working at Disney?
Technically, I'm still employed.
Well, who works anywhere now?
Yeah,
really?
I'm furloughed.
What were you doing before all this started there?
I was working in distribution, so selling our movies to movie theaters, which is a lot more difficult than it sounds, but better to be selling Disney movies than many other.
Right.
So it wasn't that hard, but
come on, buy the new Star Wars movie.
Yeah. It's more like, I always equated it to, everyone wants a Porsche.
Yeah.
Not everybody can get a Porsche. And our movies are more expensive. We have a lot more rules. You know, Disney, we're very rule oriented. So it's relationships.
If it's like a small theater somewhere in the middle of who knows where, I never thought about that. Like, I just assumed it was like everyone gets every movie. So a small theater couldn't necessarily buy the rights.
And it's not that they don't get it. Everyone's going to get it. It's when they get it. Do they get it on opening week? Do they, how long do you have to hold the movie? If you have a rule where you have to hold the movie for 4 weeks, but you're in a town of 7,000 people or 700 people, some of these places, it's like, I can't show Star Wars for 4 weeks.
I don't know.
So there's a lot of stuff, negotiating and everything. And it's also like, sometimes you want to get into those theaters, but you can't because they only have one screen. So, whose turn is it this week, kind of thing.
Fighting with Warner Brothers every other week.
So you started your show during the pandemic. Can you just walk us through how that started?
Yeah. So, I started it right before. When did the pandemic start? I started it right before we were told to go home from work.
Oh, okay.
So the idea had given to me by a coworker at the Christmas party, so, a couple months before the pandemic, because I used to bring in these historical foods and people would eat them and I'd give them little lectures. It was really popular.
Before you eat that.
And somebody who, and did enjoy them said, you should put this online. People would actually enjoy learning the stuff and finding out how to make these foods. And so I kind of thought about it for a couple months and finally put out my first episode. I just had my 1-year anniversary last
pandemic
week,
anniversary, pretty much.
Pandemic anniversary. Yeah. And then when the pandemic hit and I was sent home from work a couple weeks into the show, then I was like, okay, I can put out an episode every week. Nay, I have to, because I have nothing else to do other than sit and watch TV all day. So it was kind of like, because my fiance was still working, so it was just the thing to keep me out of his hair.
Yeah.
Because I had to sit upstairs and not watch TV all day. Though I do kind of miss, because now I have like no time to watch TV. I really do kind of miss those very early days where I could be like, all right, I'm going to watch an entire season of TV today.
Yeah. Me too. We were watching 3 episodes of The Sopranos every single day for like 2 months.
In the first few weeks, I would sit down and watch an entire season of Midsummer Murders, which is a British murder mystery show.
Yes.
It's literally 12 hours of television. And I would do it in a sitting. I would order food. Surprising that I put on weight in those first months.
Those were the glory days.
Yeah.
So you were basically doing this only unfilmed before your show and any of this.
Yeah. Obviously, it was very different when it was unfilmed because I would, I'd make the food and then I'd throw in a couple historical facts. Now it's like a 10-minute lecture every episode that people get. It's evolved.
And it's heavily researched. Like, you really dig through, like, it seems like archives and really try to find and like looking up what this means to find out what this means, sort of research, which is, I'm not going near that.
I really enjoy it. It's a lot. Jose, my fiance, tells me that it's like I've decided to do a history final every single Tuesday. And it really is. Some of these episodes take a lot of research. I enjoy it, but each week it is is rather exhausting.
Yeah, it must be.
Namely, just because I get tired of reading. I'm a slow reader. I read about as fast as I speak, so it's not fast. So it's a lot.
Yeah, we I think on our show it's the same thing. At least it's not every week for us, but every month it feels the same way of oh my God, this paper's due. How are we?
Right?
Going to get this done?
But what I found is that because I thought that people would come for the food, and then I would kind of force feed them some history. It was you're going to take your medicine. But it turns out that the history section is the most consistently watched. Basically, if you get to the history section of the video, 99% of those people are going to finish it, which is pretty impressive that, that's the part people enjoy.
What got you into historical food to begin with?
The Great British Bake Off.
Yes.
Yes. So in the early seasons, talking about watching an entire season of television in one sitting, I went with a good friend of mine to Disney World on vacation. And then she got sick. And we spent the entire time in the room, pretty much, eating nachos and watching the Great British Bake Off. And I became obsessed with it. And so when I came home, I made everything that they had made on the show. So that's how I actually taught myself how to bake and cook, because I hadn't really cooked before that. But they used to have these little history segments on the show. And they would talk for 2 minutes about the history of whatever food they were making. And then they discontinued those. I guess people weren't that interested, but I was, and I missed them. So that's kind of how the format of the show, in a way, came to me, was I want to recreate that feeling of learning about the food that they were making.
Before, I want to step away from food for a second, because I have to ask about your Pokemon that are always in the background. Yes. Why did you decide to do that?
I didn't. How it started, the first episode didn't have a Pokemon. Well, actually, the first episode was filmed in my kitchen. So the second episode, it wasn't a Pokemon. It was Brewster from the old Animal Crossing games.
Okay.
And it was simply because he used to sit on our bar cart, and I was filming and didn't notice that he was behind me. But people noticed, some of my friends, it was just my friends and family who were watching that, and they were like, oh, why do you have that, And so the next week I was like, I'll switch it out, put another one. But those first 4 or 5 weeks, they weren't Pokemon. There were other characters and stuff that I had. But then my Jose's collection, we're only audio, I guess, but I have a bunch of them behind me. It's a pile, and this is only half of them. He has a collection. So he was like, you know what? I'm going to start featuring these in your show, so you don't put anything. So I tell him each week, okay, I'm doing an episode on Irish stew and the potato famine, and he will pick a Pokemon to go with it. And sometimes it's really on the nose, and then sometimes there isn't
the
a
Irish
Pokemon. Yeah, well, so there's one that kind of looks like potatoes coming out of the ground, so sometimes it's a little tongue-in-cheek, I guess. But
I lost track of Pokemon after the first, I think, 300. So if you told me there was this one's an Irish potato Pokemon, I'd believe you, because there's so many crazy things now.
They're 800 and something now, and they are just so crazy. And I was never a big Pokemon fan growing up. I was kind of too old for that, but I got into
never
he was. You never well, that's what I found out, because he would try to get me into it, and I was like, no. And then Pokemon Go came out, and we spend so much time walking around playing that game. So it taught me all the Pokemon. So now I'm into it.
And suckered into it with that walking game.
Yeah.
It's the only way I get exercise these days. So.
I want to know what's, of all the things you've made, because I've always said that food from the 60s and earlier is pretty disgusting, but you make good stuff. But I want to know what the most disgusting thing you've ever made or tried from the show has been.
The most disgusting thing, I think probably, the Kikion, which is, who knows if it's actually...
It's a Pokemon?
It's right. It sounds like it. No, it's this potion. And when I use the word potion, I mean magical potion that was made in ancient Greece. Homer talks about it in the Iliad. And basically it's just wine and cheese. It's basically a wine plate, wine, cheese, and barley mixed together into a porridge.
Ooh.
And it's not even the flavor that was not great. It was the texture. I don't know. It's kind of gloopy. It's kind of like that sludge from Harry Potter movies, the polyjuice potion.
Yeah.
That's what I equated it to.
Did it give you any powers when you drank it?
It gave me nothing but a little heartburn because of the wine.
That's the power.
That's the power. The power of heartburn.
I just watched your Cockatrice episode the other day.
Yes.
And the construction was disgusting, but you were in the episode was saying it was pretty good. I'm like, yeah, it would be good, but also visually, like if I ate it, a fork under it was like covered in something, and I stuck a fork into a area. It's fine.
Yeah, that and the melosomos both. It's like, oh, they actually don't taste bad. It's just because the melosomos is made out of pig's blood, and then this is a pig and a bird tied together and stuffed, and it's just like, well, that's weird. But the flavors, I mean, pig, pork, or ham, and then bird, chicken, and then it's stuffed with like bread and saffron. Who doesn't want that? I mean, it's all delicious stuff. It's just like, what a weird way. Why did you put this together this way? And I didn't come up with it, just, so people were like, what Island of Dr. Moreau kind of stuff is he doing? But
I'm going to sew a lizard to this turkey. What was there anything that was too hard for you to make that you attempted and just
tons? I don't attempt them. Usually I'm pretty well in tune with my skills. And so I'm like, I'm not going to be able to do this. And that happens. Though the Cockatrice was one of those. So I never thought that I would make it. But over the last year, if you spend, 10,000 hours doing something, you become I haven't spent 10,000 hours, but I've spent a good amount of the last year cooking and, learning, honing my skills and everything. And I still got a long way to go. But I was like, okay, I can do this. And I watched hours of people, oddly enough, stitching up wounds to learn how to stitch these animals together. Because you look up how to stitch foods together. There are surprisingly few videos on how to do that. But if you're like, well, how do I give myself stitches? And you're like, oh, I can watch hours of that. It's like
so
Dr. Pimple Popper and stuff,
You're a medic now also.
I'm a medic. I have to say, so it was the first time I've ever sewn anything. I've never even sewn a button. And I had several medical professionals say, you actually did very good with those stitches. So kudos. So I was like, all right, pretty proud of myself. I've got career options if this doesn't work out.
Mad scientist. So you said that you had done some research on some not quintessential LA, but popular LA that have become quintessential, really, dishes.
Yeah. So, what? It was funny. The first thing I was thinking was foods that were actually invented here. Like the Cobb salad was invented here. And one of my favorite, the French dip, which we call it the LA dip, but that was invented here, but there actually isn't that much history around them. It was like, oh, it was invented here, end of story. But there is a food that is very Southern California, very LA, and that's tamales. And so I had done an episode on the history of tamales going back to the Aztecs and the Mayans and the early tamales, but had only skimmed the surface of, how they ended up here in Los Angeles. And so it is kind of interesting because we don't know when tamales came to Los Angeles. It could have been before the Mexican-American War. The thing is, tamales were not ubiquitous in Mexico. They were actually shunned by much of the society because they were seen as like the food of the poor. And by poor, I mean the food of the native Mexicans rather than the Spanish conquerors. So they had a stigma, and that stigma lasted all the way until the 1900s. So we don't know if they had them here in Southern California early on. But by the 1870s, there are records of tamaleros, or like tamale men, selling tamales on the streets. What's interesting is, so a lot of them obviously were Mexican, but a lot of them were also Chinese.
Really?
Because Chinese immigrants had come over or had settled here, and often, it's one thing to open a Chinese food restaurant or something like that, but it's much easier to start your business making tamales and selling them as a street food. And that's what they were. They were street food. So it's probably, an easier way to get into business.
It's weird that you mentioned that Chinese people were selling them, because I had this thing in China that was kind of like a tamale that they serve like on certain holidays, but it's basically like sort of like a cornmeal sort of thing wrapped inside of, I don't know, it was like a banana leaf or some sort of husk, and I thought it was a tamale. So
weird.
It makes sense that there's something familiar, like kind of familiar to them maybe.
I mean, tamales are very simple, if extremely labor intensive to make, but they're simple and they keep. So you can, it's hard, like, okay, I'm going to make some, I don't know, chow mein 5 minutes out on the street, and that stuff is cold and not terribly pleasant to sell, and it's hard to, like, you can't just pick one up with your hand. Whereas tamales,
grab it.
It's a grab and go food, and that's how they used to be. You didn't eat them with a fork. You would leave them kind of wrapped in the husk and eat them, it was a hand food. But it started to get a stigma, who knows exactly what it was, but it was probably a racist, it was the 1890s and stuff. So they tried to, it had to be. They tried to get rid of these tamaleros off the streets of downtown LA. They started putting in laws that made it so they could only sell during certain hours of the night. So it was like, that you can start selling at 10 p.m. and you can only sell on these 3 blocks of downtown. And then they started
equating it to like prostitution.
Yeah, seriously.
You can only do it in this district after this hour.
The red light the red hot district. They started putting, like, you had to pay for a license to sell it, which, I mean, I kind of get that. Yeah. And then they tried to just outlaw them altogether, but it never really worked. They just kept going.
That's kind of similar to what's with the hot dog carts and all that today.
Yeah. What finally got them out for a long time was the Olympics in 1932, and they did a clean sweep and got rid of all of the street vendors in favor of indoor sit-down restaurants. What's interesting is those indoor sit-down restaurants were not, for the most part, called Mexican food when they were selling Mexican food, because you could buy tamales and tacos and stuff in these restaurants, but they weren't called Mexican food. They were called Spanish food, which my grandmother used to call Mexican food Spanish food because that's what she grew up seeing. And it was because there was a stigma around Mexican food. There was one place called Little Pedro's in downtown that, like, we are Mexican food, and they actually they were around for forever. They only closed, I don't know, probably like 15 or 20 years ago, I think. Otherwise, it was Spanish food. And even today, there's still like a vestigial Spanish thing. If you go to a Mexican food restaurant and order rice, they still will call it Spanish rice. Yeah. There's nothing Spanish about it. It's Mexican. I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, that's like why the Spanish. Why would, I don't know. That doesn't make any sense.
There's do we still have a little bit of that stigma? I think yes. In this country we do. So just imagine what it was 150 years ago, 120 years ago. I'm sure it was a lot worse.
Do you know if tamales were like? Because I know that different parts of the country have they do tamales differently. Like I know in the South it's like chili in a corn husk or something.
They do. So tamales have had like different waves of popularity coming into the United States, and so they came up originally through Texas, and the people who actually were selling them were not Mexican, but it was black people who, again, it was the tamale men typically were African-American people selling huge in Memphis, huge in Chicago, huge in Kansas City. And so that was, again, back in the day, that's going to create a stigma around them as well. So they were seen as, and they were very different from the tamales that we eat, because they would have influences from African-American cuisine, from Texas cuisine, so chili, like you said. They were much spicier. They typically were much spicier than what we have out here in the West. Okay. They were called red hots instead of tamales.
I was going to ask why they would always say, like, come get your hot tamales. They're so spicy. I've never had a spicy tamale.
So they were actually called red hots, not because of the spice, but because they were served hot.
Oh,
so that's where the term had come from. They were called red hots, as were hot dogs. So it was kind of, that's
which
confusing.
Are so spicy.
So spicy. Hey, spicy hot dog. But so in 1893, the Chicago had the World's Fair, and that was the first time that tamales went mainstream, because they served them at the Chicago World's Fair, and so everyone, they became incredibly popular throughout the entire country, and that started off the Tamale Wars, which, I kid you not, were extremely violent Like people died.
Really?
They were essentially, so think of like drug gang war back in the 80s, but it's tamales. So different cities, and in my tamale episode, I actually quote some of these articles. In Kansas City, in St. Louis, in Dallas, they had these different factions who ran the tamale carts, and they would get on each other's turf and fight, and people died. And they were called the Tamale Wars. It was a huge thing back in like the early 1900s through the 1920s. So there's always that like little part of history where it's like, really? Yes, really. But I don't think they ever came to the West Coast. At least I couldn't find any history of the Tamale Wars.
Oh, they're
hitting
coming.
Los Angeles. Los Angeles tamales ended up becoming something very different for a while, because when they got big in 1893, then in 1894, there was a company called Excelente or Excellent, which is just spelled XLNT tamales. And it's still around today. It's one of the oldest, not only the oldest Mexican food companies in the country, but it's one of the oldest companies in Southern California.
Really?
And they would make tamales, but they would be kind of different. They would be beef, but then also carrots are in them. And still to this day, that's the recipe. Carrots are in them. And instead of being wrapped in corn or banana leaves, they would be wrapped in like kind of paper. And they actually
like lined paper.
So they, yeah, right. Wide rule. So they actually ended up becoming very, very popular, and still are to this day. You can find them in like the frozen food sections at Ralph's sometimes and stuff. But they are, if you took one to Mexico and said, this is a tamale, you'd just get laughed at, because they're very, I've never had one, so I can't say that they're not good, but they're not
No, this
authentic.
Is a tamale. I think the ones from Trader Joe's, which maybe are made by that company, have the beef ones have carrot in them. So I wouldn't be surprised.
Yeah, I mean, they're still around, so they're doing something right, but they're just definitely not. Now I feel like tamales are best when they're homemade, and around the holidays there are huge, tamale making parties and stuff like that. So it's just very, very different food, but
it's always been like November to February food for me. By February, it's already like we're on the last couple tamales and
enough of
them.
That's the nice thing. They last forever. When they started out back in, the Mayan and early Aztec era, they were a way to make food portable and travelable. So you could make some tamales, and then once that corn is cooked, it's not going to go bad. So they wouldn't necessarily put stuff in it. Like, you're not going to have beef, and they didn't have beef, but you're not even going to put meat or anything in there, because that could go bad. But the corn's not going bad. So it would just be wrapped, cooked corn. You can keep it for months. Travel
I feel
with
like those are the best things, because I always hear like Civil War soldiers, they invented fried chicken and like hard-boiled eggs because that could last them in their battle. And now that's all I eat now is fried chicken and hard-boiled
chickens and hard-boiled eggs.
I wonder at what point, when did tacos take over as being like the street food?
The 1930s.
Okay.
Really?
Yeah, it was in the 1930s that tamales as the street food kind of started waning, and tacos came in. And I mean, still to this day, that's what, at least here in LA, I feel like.
Yeah, I don't see
there aren't that many tamale sellers on the streets. Probably because it's a lot of work to make tamales. Granted, they last, but tacos, it's like, here you go.
Yeah.
So much easier.
And no one's going to try to hold on to a taco for like a month. So
No, you shouldn't do that. They're too good. Yeah, I can't hold on to them for like an hour. Are you kidding me?
I wrap mine in corn husk. What do you want, Craig?
I did find it was interesting, just because I'm always like shocked and annoyed by how cheap things used to be. And I found a menu from 1927, and it had 2 tamales, 25 cents. It's actually, shaving a haircut, 2 tamales. I think those are some pretty expensive tamales, considering that a shaving a haircut now, that's like $40. So
nothing gets me madder than going through old menus looking at prices, and I don't even try to figure out the exchange between like time and like what that would have been. I'm just mad that like that steak was $7 at the Coconut Grove.
That, or God, don't even look at home prices then. It's like $4,000 for a 6-bedroom.
For the biggest house in the city.
Yeah, there was. I really wish. So, do you guys remember? Because no, you don't. But there was a period of time where, especially in LA, all over the country, but especially in LA, they would build buildings shaped like what they sold. Like the Brown Derby was a Brown Derby hat.
Yeah. Even though they didn't sell hats, but
they didn't sell hats. It was very confusing, actually. But one of the oldest tamale restaurants, they were the tamale sellers, but then they like legitimized when they had the restaurants and you could actually go eat there. It was called the Tamale, and they sold hamburgers, hot tamale pie, and malted milk. But it was shaped like a tamale, and it was I think in like downtown, and now it's obviously not there. But.
That's just like a rectangle.
No,
with
it's
like ridges.
It's like the tamale. It's like round. It's got like cylindrical.
Yeah, it's kind of cylindrical, and
but how can you tell it's a? I mean, looking at a tamale,
it says the tamale on it. That's how you tell. I mean,
because they tell you it's a tamale.
I think one of the facades of, if they had a chain, I think one of them is still surviving, because I think SO Touric has a tour where they pass the old tamale thing, and it's just like painted white now. I don't know what it is. It's probably like tax services or something now.
Right. But tamale tax services.
Tamale services. But I think that one of the facades for that is still up, which is fascinating that someone's like, we got to preserve this big tamale.
You know what I think too, because there's a picture somewhere. You can find a picture of it on the internet, and I think like the ends are kind of like tapered and then look like they've been tied off. Okay. At the end of the building, so it gives a little tamale.
It could double as a hot dog stand, though.
It could totally double as a hot dog stand, like a really short hot dog.
Yeah. My favorite kind, really short and spicy. I want to know, because we were thinking about like historic, because we've gone over in some of our episodes like things that were invented in LA and like old LA restaurants. Do you have any things from LA history from certain places that you've wanted to try? Because we came up with a few that
I don't know. I'm trying to think. All the stuff that I want to try don't exist in. Like I'd love to go to the Brown Derby, but
well, that's one of my these are things that no longer exist, because I would want to try the coconut cake from the Brown Derby. I hear was great. I want to try a hot fudge sundae from C.C. Brown, which was the place that invented it.
Yeah.
And I also want to try a cookie from the original Famous Amos.
Right.
Was that here?
Yeah, it was on Sunset.
Yeah.
Wait, I didn't know Famous Amos was like
he's
actual
a person.
baker. Well, I knew he was a person, but I didn't know he had a location. I always thought that he just sold in stores.
No, he had a store on Sunset Boulevard, because he worked at like A&E Records or some record label, and he would just like bring in cookies during the holidays, and kind of like you, and people would be like, these are great cookies, you should do something, and he opened up a store, and that's so how it all started.
I love the Famous Amos cookies. Even now, like just the package, I can eat an entire box.
Oh my god, I would eat one every single day in elementary school with my
one.
one
box, right?
I would go with like a Costco case every single day.
It had its own wheels and
right?
Your cat's like doing gymnastics behind you.
I don't know what they're doing. What is he doing? He's nuts.
What did you come up with, Greg? What did you want to try from LA history?
It's funny because you were. I think we'd all agree what we really want is the experience of being at a place, because there's nothing like exclusively just that you can only get at this certain point. But like the Moscow Mule was made at the Cock and Bull for the first time. I would have liked to have it there. And then just looking through old menus, there's so many desserts that I would have tried on name only, which aren't even like the rum baba just sounds good, but it's just like a strawberry shortcake pretty much covered in rum. So. But I would want to be at the Coconut Grove eating a rum baba.
That would be nice. I would like to have visited and had like a soda, an old-timey soda. Would be, what was it where... No, it's just gone out of my head. It was, I think, just south of Sunset on Vine, and it was where the actress was discovered at Schwab's.
Yeah.
Schwab's. I want to get discovered and make it in the talkies.
I want the Lana Turner story for me.
Lana Turner, there it is. Yes.
Actually, that place was where F. Scott Fitzgerald bought the Hershey bar that gave him a heart attack from Schwab's.
And another addition to this story, Nathaniel West, who wrote Dave Locust, died on his way to the F. Scott Fitzgerald funeral.
That place is cursed. So do you really want to go there?
No, maybe not.
We got you.
All right. Instead, I want a cocktail at Trader Vic's back in like in the heyday. I'll do that instead.
Fair. No one's died from Trader Vic's
that we know of. They cover it all up.
So what are your, like right now, what are some of the places you like around LA to eat? Obviously.
Go anywhere right now, really.
Well, when I say right now, I mean a year and 4 months ago.
Yeah. Gosh, you know what? Mozza is one of my favorite places, as is Bloodsoes.
Oh,
it's a barbecue place
really good.
on. Is it on La Brea?
La Brea, yeah. Right past Pink's.
4th Street. Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, just south of Pink's.
They're really good.
The amount of like unbelievable quality meat that you can get it's brilliant. You don't feel like you even, because they sell like barbecue sandwiches and barbecue, stuff like that. No, I want a pound of meat. and they don't look at you like you're crazy. They're like, here it is, pound of meat. That's how it's sold.
The last time I was there, the table next to me, it was like 4 people, but they got like a whole ranch's worth of beef just like brought up to their table on a forklift, and it looked great.
No, their brisket is to die for. It's amazing.
Yeah,
so that's definitely one of my favorite places.
Good one.
You should try the I don't know if you've been there, the Fair Oaks Pharmacy, if you want an old soda fountain experience in Pasadena.
South Pasadena,
yeah.
Oh, I'll have to check them out.
Well, those are. Do you have any more questions, Greg? That's all I've got.
No, just praise. I think you're fantastic, and thank you for taking time to talk to us.
Thank you. It's my pleasure.
We'll say bye to you off the air, so we'll end this recording. But let's publicly say thank you so much for doing this with us.
Thank you for having me.
All right, I'm gonna stop the recording, and we'll keep talking and make fun of all the listeners.